Controversial rapper and actor Tupac Shakur has died in a Las Vegas hospital.
Rap star Biggie Smalls, the notorious B.I.G., was shot dead by a drive-by gunman.
Someone had had enough of seeing this, and there was an anonymous letter sent to law enforcement saying, these guys are living like drug dealers.
Yo can't wait till he's just gone for good, so they can fully breathe a sigh of relief.
He's dead. That person's dead. And everybody feels comfortable with the fact of that. When I say everybody, I mean whoever set it up.
They're not gonna rest until Suge Knight is dead or in jail.
It was a setup.
Could you please state your full name for the record?
Yes, Tupac Shakur. I started off with poetry, writing poetry.
Mm-hmm.
But
like junior high, high school?
Yes,
okay.
Junior high school. And poets I saw were like looked on as like wimps. Mm-hmm. So I did that personally, but then I started turning the poetry into songs.
From the moment that I met Tupac at the age of 17, he was one of the most startling individuals I've ever met. He was, and still is, just one of the most amazing voices. I love Pac instantly.
It's how you raised. We weren't raised barricaded, although the FBI was always lurking around and all of that, but you still went about your business. The kids still played outside. When they came upstairs and ate dinner. The only lock on the door was your police bar in New York and your little lock. But you weren't standing at the window with guns. That's not what his life was. It may have been others, but it wasn't his.
He became like my little brother, actually. I work with many different artists, but he's the guy who invites you to your home, who you talk to, late at night. He was just very easy to know for me. I kind of feel like he was that way with many more people, which is why he's so missed, because when people met him, they really got a chance to get a piece of him.
Months and months I kept talking about needing a young artist that had a voice that could translate and cross all boundaries.
Tupac was one of those guys who said what was on his mind.
plenty of days and nights. The brother, he kept a smile on us. We kept joking. He was one of them guys that had a personality that he wasn't always serious. You know what I mean? He could be going through the worst things in court and things like that, facing the worst things in his world, but he always kept a smile on his face. He always, he always kept us laughing.
It is of my opinion that I was rapping while I was writing poetry.
Okay.
And so I was into rap, I guess you could say, from junior high when I wrote my first poem.
I fought a lot of people around me because Pac, when he was so young, he was already a contradiction in so many ways, externally and internally, and he lived out loud. So nothing surprised me. He was so in your face.
Pac really down to earth. He was a good dude. He had good intentions, you know what I mean? It's just that, unfortunately, sometimes in these streets, it can mislead us and have us doing and going the wrong way, you know?
A lot of people nowadays like to say Tupac was loyal, but Tupac was really only loyal to Tupac. He was loyal to what he wanted.
What my and Pac's friendship and love was about making shit happen.
If you could ride with that, he was fine with it. But if it was something that you couldn't ride with, he would move on. Or if you did something he didn't like, or if you didn't give him the attention that he thought he needed at that particular time, he was done with you. He might just be done with you for the night, but he was done with you at least for that night. And then he may reconsider the next morning and you guys would be fine. But that's just how Tupac was.
Mm-hmm. And after I heard on the radio that there were other poets who made records and they were selling and it was working, then I decided to change the method of my poetry.
We had Los Angeles police officers working within the organization, Compton police officers working within inside the organization. Their badges stopped us from getting to the truth.
No one is above the law. This is a fundamental principle in our society. And when it is violated, it's the job of the Department of Justice to step in and hold individuals accountable.
The 51-year-old deputy chief is now facing federal charges of selling drugs. 3 drugs in particular: oxycodone, heroin, and marijuana.
In a 3-year investigation, which San Francisco police officers have been indicted. All the officers were put on administrative assignment, taken off of any street. Certain officers, because of the seriousness of the allegation, were disarmed.
And unfortunately, in this particular case, we had to take 3 police officers who were sworn to uphold public safety off the street. From my point of view, I'm battling the Mexican cartels in Chicago. Now I got to worry about this. Now I got to worry about this. Now I got to worry about this. Now I got to worry about this.
Turn it off. I just enjoyed the fringe benefits that came with a credential. Nightlife, the party life, the rubbing elbows with the powerful in Juarez and Chihuahua. When I was with the feds, there was this, one guy. This happened after the Pablo Acosta incident. We were doing a job. One of the other agents had a case and we were called in to help him. And we went into this house, real nice house. I turn around, there's a bag, a paper bag, grocery bag. And I look into it and there was piles of money in it. And inside that same bag, there was many bags of ounces of cocaine. If I would have been smart, I would have kept it. But that wasn't my, that wasn't my thing. It was share alike. So I gave that money to the person in charge of that job. And some other agents were sent wrecking, taking everything. They were stealing everything. And the person I gave the money to stole the money. He never reported it. So I came back home that night. I get a knock. And I walk out, and it was two of the commandant's right hands. The commander found out about the money, and they turned around and blamed me for it. I was tortured. The same thing we did to the criminals was done to me. And the one pointing the finger, blaming me, was that same guy that was taking everything from the house. As I was, the first time as they tied my hands, my face, giving me water, shocks. When they started beating me up, the commander was accusing me of being a DEA agent working in Mexico. That was the only time I had that problem. This was the commander talking. The first night I went in there, they asked me, "Where's the money?" I gave the money to him. The guy gave the money and said, No, you didn't. And since he was the commander's right hand, he believed him more than me. So they took me into his office. They handcuffed my hands. They tied my legs. They put me on the ground. They shoved a rag up my mouth. They put a handkerchief on my face and gave me the water treatment, mineral water with pepper powder. My father gave $20-some thousand to him. They called me, they pulled me out of the cell. And they took me into an office. The commander turned around and he cursed at me for a while. And he turned around and told my father, I tortured him. Ain't shit he can do about it. I was pretty messed up. It was after 30 days, my face was swollen, my body was hurting. My bad beard, my hair was all messed up. I remember crossing the bridge and the guy at the port of entry just looked at me and said, "You okay?" "What's wrong with you?" Nothing, kept walking.
In the mid-1980s, the cocaine trade had sort of shifted from Miami, because a lot of law enforcement there, to Los Angeles. As the volume of cocaine cases and frankly the volume of cocaine per case started to grow and grow, the sheriff's departments selected some of their best narcotics officers to be what they called their majors crews to go after the big, significant, large-scale narcotics distributors.
The majors units at the LA Sheriff's Department were Majors 1, Majors 2, Majors 3, and Majors 4. Operation Big Spender was an epic announcement to discover and ferret out and punish corruption by elite law enforcement officers.
It started because some of these sheriff's deputies who were putting their lives on the line every day, as they would seize money, they at some point came up with the idea of taking a little bit of the money to try to get better equipment to help them do their jobs. Over time, it morphed into maybe people were going to lunch that day from the unit, so they would take some of the money from the kitty, as they called it, and they'd use it for lunch. And then a little later on, it might be the weekend, and they were all going out, and it's like, hey, let's take a little money from the kitty for when we go out.
Here's a good example. The time we took the Armenians down, and we have $1 million in cash in 5s, 10s, and 20s spread through all of our desks. They wouldn't let us use the money counter, so we had to do it by hand. We ordered pizza, and so we're all digging in our pockets, trying to come up with enough to pay the pizza guy, and he's looking at us like we're crazy because here's $1 million spread out all over these tables.
And then before you know it, as time progresses on, and certainly by the time of the majors teams, forget the kitty. When we seize money, let's just take some.
The predication came from drug dealers.
Later on, we find out that not only had they been planting drugs on my guys, but they had been planting drugs and lying on the witness stand and fabricating search warrants for a lot of other people.
Too many drug dealers came forward and spoke to officials and created a buzz where similar, if not identical, scenarios of, hey, it's all the same to me, but just so you know, they reported $50,000 seized from me. I had $100,000 in cash.
They basically put away the gang thing and became people that had organizations, and like Whitey's World, Way Out World, World on Wheels, Cobra Enterprises. These were all African American gang members that had narcotic organizations that made millions of dollars.
A bunch of my guys have been getting drugs planted on them when they didn't have no drugs, when they wasn't selling drugs, and I wanted to find out who these cops were that was doing this.
Ricky Ross was a legendary drug dealer, but so were a lot of people in LA.
They was taking the drugs from one person, planting them on another person and selling them to this person, and just a criminal enterprise.
Sometimes it happened invisibly to the drug dealer, but sometimes it happened right out in the open, where a seeming confidence had developed among the detectives. Nobody's going to believe this person.
At some point in, I think, 1988, someone had had enough of seeing this, and there was an anonymous letter sent to law enforcement saying, these guys are living like drug dealers. You need to check them out. They're spending money like drug dealers, they have money like drug dealers, and they're living the life of drug dealers. That led to a lengthy and exhaustive investigation culminating in a sting where they actually had a wired up, videoed up hotel room with plant alleged drug money in, I think, 1989, and they actually caught members of the Majors 2 sheriff's unit stealing money.
Thieves doing the thieving live before your eyes.
Yeah, taking a 20, nobody had ever known, but it was something that, in me, that I would have never been able to sleep. I would have been waiting for them to come and knock on my door and take me away for taking $20 from a dirtbag dope dealer with $1 million.
The sergeant on that crew, a guy named Robert or Bob Sobel, wound up flipping or cooperating, and then he testified in the first trial, and because of the information he gave and later others, the investigation spread to the other major narcotics crews.
You didn't have to do very much persuasion that there was something rotten here, because you can see it, as well as study financial records. You could see thievery occur.
On the one hand, you have Operation Big Spender and the Los Angeles County Sheriffs being prosecuted, and on the other side of the fence, you have the city of Compton.
Of course, it's not uncommon. You can take any large city or medium city or a relatively small city like Compton with a population of approximately 100,000, and you're going to be able to identify in its historical record there was corruption.
There were no lines that people of power in Compton were unwilling to cross to defend their power. No legal lines, no moral lines, no ethical lines. I just found that it was the Wild West.
Virtually every town that has a 19th century origins in Southern California started out as small agricultural colonies. But Compton was unique in that it was early on the settlers decided to incorporate. Los Angeles at the turn of the century is an emerging city. It's still not even in the top 100 cities of the United States in terms of population, but it's on the make. And just south of Compton is Long Beach.
These families have been here 40, 50, 60 years. And so everyone knows everyone. You know, if you got caught breaking into somebody's house in the neighborhood, you got a problem. If you stole from somebody in the neighborhood, you got a problem. And if you were from outside of the neighborhood, they're gonna check you out until you leave here.
So for African Americans coming from South Central Los Angeles, which was increasingly congested and deteriorated housing, for those middle class African Americans, they viewed Compton as nirvana. And whites are moving en masse so quickly, I refer to it rather than white flight as white exodus. By 1970, Compton is an African American majority community, and by the early 70s, the first community this side of the Mississippi River entirely run politically and administratively by African Americans.
So there's not a neighborhood that we're going to go into, be it Crip or Piru, that if they see my face, they're not going to stop and say, Omar, Omar.
Compton, through the 70s and 80s and 90s, enters a really trying, challenging, difficult era. You had whites move out, and they took their businesses with them. So the tax base, with all of the banks gone, in fact, downtown Compton is bulldozed. As that happens, the infrastructure of the city begins to decline.
Now these rough streets are because I'm no longer mayor.
Now, you introduce a cheap drug, crack cocaine, that with a rudimentary gang structure, that if it expands and becomes business-oriented in an underground economy, can make a hell of a lot of money.
I was captain of the fucking football team, AB student, magnet. Shit, we out there getting it. Fucking with this nigga and my brother, so we have a super long ring, it's ridiculous. I ain't having no problem. 450 SL, niggas in the 10th grade.
And for kids that can't find jobs otherwise, and schools that are deteriorating, they're having trouble staying in schools, you can make quick money, a lot of money, if you do the selling of drugs connected to gangs.
I sold drugs because I was running from poverty. I didn't like being poor and broke. You know, I didn't like not having food in the refrigerator. And I didn't like for the light man to be talking about cutting my mom's lights off.
Suge Knight was a very powerful individual. He had connections with the Compton mayor, and he had access to just about the entire Blood gang.
Death Row Records.
Death Row Records.
Death Row.
Death Row.
Death Row Records.
Death Row.
Death Row.
Death Row Records.
This is Michael Harris, a man drug agents describe as a major cocaine trafficker.
Yeah, I knew Michael Harris. Yeah, he was trying to put together his wife's album, and matter of fact, we were cellies at the time.
Harris, identifying himself as original organizer and owner, names him as an equal partner in Death Row.
I told him that he should have Dr. Dre produce a song for him. And that's how his thing with the Suge and the Dre and all started transpiring. I met Suge in MDC.
Harris's complaint also names criminal defense attorney David Kenner as the company general counsel and organizer.
Harry O and a couple other guys in there that was running for David Kenner. You know, that was their game. You hire David Kenner and then they get a kickback. I was there when he first told Kenner about the music business as well. Harry O told David Kenner that he would make him more money in the music business than he ever made doing law.
What's up, boy? What's going on, homie? Doing a documentary.
Corruption exacerbated things as prominent political figures were identified, often with a federal investigation of corruption on a variety of charges. You had some high-ranking people like U.S. Representative Tucker taking some bribes from a company, I think it was a rubbish company or a reclamation company that was come into Compton and given favored status, and the FBI investigated, and then over a course of time found guilty.
Does City Council meet in August?
No.
And yet our producer found that you were being paid in August.
Probably so.
Why so?
Tradition.
Just to be honest, I was really naive. I have worked in politics at a lot of different levels. I have worked in the White House. I've worked on 5 presidential campaigns. I'd been a deputy mayor. I'd been on the State Board of Education. Worked on a number of mayoral campaigns and gubernatorial campaigns. I had never encountered politics like I encountered in Compton.
Ben Austin worked in the White House, so he's seen politics of all kinds. They've got to be pretty bad.
Our research shows in 2012, the City Council members earned $39,000 each for serving on 4 commissions, which met for a total of 26 hours. That shakes out to $1,500 per hour.
Compton was just the Wild West, and there were simply no rules. There were no lines that people with power in Compton were unwilling to cross to defend their power. No legal lines, no moral lines, no ethical lines. I just found that it was the Wild West.
What commissions are you on?
All of them.
Do you have a favorite?
A favorite? No.
Well, what's one
I'm
of them
just
that you're
serving on the ones that's on the books. So that's it was CRA, it was public finance. You caught me by.
In nearby Huntington Park, council members make less than $15,000 a year. Ditto over in Maywood, the politicians there make about $6,700 a year. And in affluent Huntington Beach, council members earn about $16,000.
And the rules of engagement, the normal rules of engagement, do not apply.
Do they do anything?
Well, they listen to the audience comments, and then they may comment on that.
And then they decide something? It's just
there's nothing to decide.
So the people that came into power hired their cousins and their uncles and others into the jobs, especially in the school district, right, which was the largest employer for city residents. But in 1993, the state does something unprecedented. It takes over the Compton School District. State had never done that before.
School board president announced during a debate about this that we just need to accept that all children are not going to succeed.
All kids are not going to make it.
That's just the opening salvo. That was their basic premise from which they were operating. And everything else flows from there.
And the board, sometimes we don't even know what's going on.
I mean, the words that were spoken in Compton.
I gave you your 5 minutes. There would be no more speaking.
And the actions that were taken were, in my mind, in an alternate universe. And like I said, I had come there having worked in the White House and on 5 presidential campaigns.
All kids are not going to make it.
And I had never seen anything like this.
Adult issues are important.
So you have, in that period of the late 80s to the late 90s, this mountain of scandals in the school district, in City Hall, in the representatives to Congress from the city.
I was at an education conference in San Diego, and I saw across the hall the former superintendent of Compton. He just happened to be there. I remember it was yesterday. He turns to me and he says, "You're a crazy motherfucker." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And he said, "Well, when I was superintendent of Compton, the mayor called me one day and said that I needed to sell a parcel of land to a developer friend of his. And he said, that he refused, that he wasn't going to do it." So soon after that, a school caught on fire. And a couple of days, a week later, another school catches on fire. And then it happens again. And so he called the fire chief, or the police chief, I don't remember which. And he said, "When is this gonna stop? What's going on here? We got a huge problem." And he said, "The fires will stop when the mayor says the fires will stop." They were essentially doing this eyes wide open. They'd done a report on themselves. They learned that the schools were not performing well because of affirmative decisions they were making and didn't make any changes. And that was, for me, a real poster child for an educational system that is fundamentally designed to serve the needs of adults, not the needs of children.
Adult issues are important.
Kids in McKinley are 50 times more likely to drop out of school than to go to college. Right. I mean, that's a huge concern, and especially for these parents that want their kids to succeed like any parent does. And so first thing, they wanted to get their kids out of this school district.
I founded an organization called Parent Revolution, and we invented a new law called the Parent Trigger Law. The law says that if half the parents at a failing school sign a petition, they can bring in new staff, they can bring in new leadership, they can convert their school to a charter school, or they can use the law as leverage to bargain. But it wasn't until we turned the petitions in on December 7th that the blowback really began. They mapped the networks of the school and figured out the children of the parents who signed the petition. And for the children of the parents who signed the petition, and these are elementary school kids, they wouldn't let the children, when they were at school, they wouldn't let them go to the bathroom. They forced the children to pee in their pants, and when they did, they were sent to the nurse's office, and the nurse was in charge of the rescissions. And so the nurse would call in the mom to bring clean underwear in, and as the mom was changing their child's underwear, the nurse would ask her to sign a rescission petition.
And I just want to make this statement. When Omar had the city with a surplus, had the murder rate drop from 100 a year down to 20 by bringing in the sheriff and getting rid of the corrupt Compton PD.
And now we see that the corruption that's passed from the city government and the corruption that's infected the schools is now passing its way down to the Compton Police Department. But you have to ask yourself this question. The entire Compton Police Department was disbanded. What does it take to disband an entire police department?
In order to disband an entire police department, things have to be so bad and so corrupt that there's no other alternative, such as maybe bringing in a new police chief, new police administration, or something of that nature.
They envied Compton streets when I was mayor. I used to get on the radio and laugh at them because they couldn't figure out my formula.
It has happened on occasion where the entire municipality has been dissolved. The bottom line is things have to be pretty bad before that happens.
I had personal interaction with them working the gang detail from 84 to 90. We didn't share a lot of information with them because of the city government was known to be corrupt, and the police department had a stigma of not being on the up and up. It was like shoveling sand against the tide.
You'd hear over and over again that the Compton cops were on the payrolls of the gangs. Initially, when the word that cops were working for Suge was out, was that basically they were providing intelligence. But also when cops, when there'd be a clear street and there wouldn't be any cops around.
And one of the things that the former mayor of Compton, Omar Bradley, told us was that there actually wasn't a difference between Death Row Records and the city of Compton.
They've always been the same entity. That's what you don't get. The city attorney's nephew or cousin is Snoop Dogg. The city manager's son is A&R. The head of homicide's son is vice president, head of security. The other chief of police that I bring in to replace Yuri, his daughter got $1 million contract with Death Row.
They reached out to the Los Angeles County sheriffs to see if the sheriffs would be interested in policing Compton.
In police work, in law enforcement, there is so much duplication of services. They overlap, and a lot of times eliminating a police department really doesn't harm the public because another department can come in and take care of it.
The way this actually worked was the FBI walked into Omar Bradley's office one day because a Long Beach police officer had been shot with a gun that had flowed through the Compton police evidence locker. And so the FBI wanted to know if Omar Bradley was in on it. And Omar Bradley said, "I don't know what you're talking about." And that led to an investigation into the Compton corruption that was happening. When they start this investigation, they come in and they find the evidence locker is just a mess. The inventory hasn't been done in years and years and years. And Chief Ori Taylor is suspended.
A group of those cops, sort of an elite group of those cops, were actually like a criminal gang.
And we're not talking about just casual trips down to the locker. We're talking about 172 unaccounted for visits.
And they ask Ori Taylor if they can start looking into the lockers, and Ori Taylor is pacing back and forth. "Oh, I don't think I have a key, and I don't think the key's around." And he seems like he's nervous and he's upset. And so the investigator pulls out bolt cutters and just cuts off the lock to Ori Taylor's locker. And inside they find 2 kilos of cocaine in the police chief's personal locker. And Ori Taylor all of a sudden decides he doesn't want to be there, and he leaves the police station.
And Ori Taylor gestures to his attorney as he's running up the back stairs to follow him up there, and that's the last they see of Ori Taylor.
Cases were being rejected by the DA's office, and the Compton police were actually keeping the evidence. And a lot of that evidence was being kept in the evidence locker, and then when they actually go to look for the evidence, it's missing. Compton was a very corrupt city, and the police were trafficking narcotics, using the evidence locker as their warehouse.
So that's how they paying them. But you got to understand, we give you the dope, you give us a business deal. So our money looks good because our money's coming off this business deal. But where's their money coming from? Coming from the dope coming out the evidence line. And the guns, 2,300 guns missing. 140 gallons of PCP.
I mean, money laundering is if you take drug money and you go buy a car, you just laundered that money. If you go buy clothes, you just laundered that money. That's a small scale.
They started calling people in one at a time. Nobody was taking the rap for what was happening and all the corruption, and they were blaming other people. There was an awful lot of finger pointing. They were also trafficking in stolen guns. And a lot of those guns were going into the evidence locker and then finding their way over to a gun shop in Compton.
City clerk, he owns part owner of the gun shop. ATF, FBI, Homeland Security,
And Baca.
All went, about 400 people went in there to get all them guns out. They had to bring up a big rig to get all the shit together.
There's no coincidence that the Compton police corruption report happened at the exact same time that we had the Rampart scandal. And so you have this pattern that includes actually the DA's office in the missing cocaine, but nothing ever happens. And you have an assistant district attorney who refuses to prosecute Horry Taylor, but then turns around and is the one that was pursuing Omar Bradley the entire time Omar Bradley had his corruption trial, which was eventually overturned. But even after it was overturned, the assistant district attorney kept pursuing Omar Bradley.
Within 3 years after Omar Bradley is defeated as mayor and Eric Perrodin takes over, fellow prosecutor Terry Bork presses charges against Omar Bradley for corruption as it applies to credit card charges. Yet when those same credit card charges that are made by Eric Perrodin are presented to Terry Bork with the question as to whether or not that's actually corruption, Terry Bork says that even if he found that those credit card charges were corruption, he would not prosecute Eric Perrodin.
Reggie Wright Sr. is in charge of narcotics at the Compton Police Department. And so they bring him in for questioning. And Reggie Wright Sr. Immediately starts talking about how, you know, even though he's the man that's in charge and the responsibility really stops with him, that he doesn't ever make any decisions. And so they really shouldn't be looking at him. They should be looking at the guy under him and the guy over him. Everybody is pointing to other people to blame for the malfeasance that was going on in the department.
Now, it looks like the time in the Compton police report that Reggie Wright Sr. was actually in charge of both the narcotics and the gang units was about a year. But prior to that, he had been in charge of the gangs. And who deals the drugs? The gangs.
The Compton Police Corruption Report is a 95-page document. So when it was decided that they were going to shut down the Compton Police Department, a lawsuit was filed.
One of the things that struck us immediately was that there was a handful of people in the Compton Police Department that were just not satisfied with the Compton Police Department being closed.
It was heard before a judge. They tried to do everything they could to block this from being shut down. And the judge heard the case, they had their day in court, and the judge allowed them to shut down the Compton Police Department.
Even though Omar Bradley had been successful in shutting down the corrupt Compton Police Department, what do you think was the first priority on Eric Perrodin's agenda? Restarting the Compton PD.
The whole notion of I am my brother's keeper doesn't exist over here. This is dog eat dog.
So what you have here is a real dilemma for the Compton Police Department because it's sort of like a vice. On the one hand, you have the Operation Big Spender and the sheriffs and everybody that's surrounding the city of Compton being investigated for corruption as it relates to the drug trade. And on the other side of it, you have the Justice Department and the Drug Enforcement Agency coming down on death row records and looking at death row records for money laundering as it relates to drug sales. So where is in the middle? The Compton Police Department.
I was approached by the FBI
and ATF about a year afterwards, while I was working with Death Row Records in regards to racketeering within Death Row Records, and also at that time, the mayor of Compton, Omar Bradley. Some other things that occurred within the city. I didn't know that the FBI at that time was following Reggie, Suge, the homeboys, and that's how things started out with the FBI.
He really was not that street person. He didn't understand the street's value.
At 24, Tupac Shakur was a platinum-selling artist, the movie star, and an inmate at the Dannemora jail in upstate New York.
By the time that Tupac Shakur had gone to prison, he had already shot 2 cops in the city of Atlanta. The charges were dropped against him, but he'd still shot cops. So he was no favorite with law enforcement.
That's just plain out period. Don't come to jail. I'm telling you straight up. This ain't the spot. It's dirty, it's filthy, it's like you an animal. And it's just not the spot. No man don't want to be here. No man or woman wants to be here.
Pac is now in Dannemora. Everybody is visiting him back and forth.
Before the Rikers, after the Rikers, Dannemora, after Dannemora, I mean, I visited him. I took a trip. One day I was like, I gotta go to New York and see Pac.
And I think also that Tupac got it in his mind that he needed someone to protect him. Now, that again isn't true, that he needed someone to protect him, because Watani had always put a group of people around him to look out for him. The reason things happened to Tupac is Tupac would step outside of that group. If people put a group of people around you to look out for you, you need to stay inside that group. You don't need to step out and create new alliances with people that you don't know.
I got a phone call that Death Row had went to visit Tupac, and that I think he's signing with Suge.
The whole kind of Death Row thing is Tupac wanted to go to Death Row. What he told me face to face, as close as we were sitting, is I want to go to Death Row because I want to record with Dre and Snoop. He said to me, you can make the phone call or I'll have someone make the phone call. And I think Watani and I were both there at Dannemora talking to him at the time and told him, you don't need to do that. There's no reason to do that. You're #1 on the charts. Your record's outselling anybody at this particular time. All Death Row is Interscope. You don't need to go to Death Row.
Pac worked 24/7.
Because I knew he was gonna end it. This was just a means. He had to get out of jail, and he wanted his mom to have a house, and he would do those 3 albums. And after those 3 albums were done, the house is paid for. What is he gonna do? Because he had other ambitions.
At the time, Suge wasn't letting anyone work with Dre or Snoop unless they were part of Death Row.
In those months, in those last 9 months of his life, he had the kind of desperation that I talked about earlier. The only thing that mattered was to make a difference.
Thug life is like the 12th grade. Some people graduate from high school and don't seek to do anything else.
His lifestyle on video and on tape and even on song looked like a party. It wasn't a party, it wasn't a gangster party, it wasn't a party at all.
You have to remember, Tupac was out on bail. And the reason that he was rushing to get as many songs done as he could was because he wasn't sure that that bail wouldn't be revoked at some point and that he may actually go back to prison.
He was not a gangster. Not one day in his life, not even the day in the MGM when he stomped whoever the hell that was on the floor.
I was in a limo, me and Tupac, Outlaw Immortals. We were driving around in Harlem, and the radio came on with Snoop Dogg saying that he had no beef with New York, which sent Pac into a rage.
And at that time, the artist at the height of that whole forefront was Snoop. How the fuck did that feel?
'Cause I am the LBC. I'm the king of Long Beach, nigga. I made it fashionable for niggas to bang the dub. I made it universal, motherfucker. I'm the nigga that took the set around the whole globe.
23-year-old Calvin Brodus, a.k.a. Snoop Doggy Dogg, the man who made gangster rap mainstream, stands accused of murder.
Los Angeles police announced that 21-year-old Calvin Broadus, better known as rap star Snoop Doggy Dogg, had turned himself into police on Friday, along with 2 other young black men, all accompanied by an attorney, in connection with the murder on August 25th of a man named Philip Waldemariam, and what police believe was a gang-related shooting.
We, the jury in above entitled action, find the defendant, Calvin Broadus, not guilty of the crime of murder in the first degree.
Only if David Kennedy just would have had love for me on that level and just did it for me, just not for the paper, but just doing it for the love, because I know that's how he is about me. He's not concerned with the money issue, and you know what I'm saying? And I knew that when he did his closing argument.
You know, we beat a murder trial for him, but then he was on probation. Then he got caught with 2 ounces of marijuana. Then he got caught with guns. And each time it's nothing. They're not going to violate him. Because for the street guys know what I'm talking about. There's no puzzle. I mean, if you get a guy that constantly getting in trouble and never going to come to prison, that's because he's an informant. He's a rat, a snitch.
You know, it was Suge and his guys and Tupac and myself. And it was Snoop Dogg and Dre and the Dog Pound. That's how it was on the personal side.
But, you know, that was Pac, man. You cross him, there's no gray area. It's black and white. You cross him, you do something, you screw up, you are out.
Now, since he's not around, everybody claims that they was great friends. Everybody do a show. Some artists knew him, but like Pac and Snoop at the end hated each other. And you could tell that by the simple fact that when Snoop did Dogfather, Pac was not on that one song. And Pac didn't like Dre. That would change the Death Row camp because of the jealousy of Tupac. Because Tupac was all of a sudden now, he's this major star, he getting all the light, he getting all the attention.
I didn't feel nothing from nobody at first. I mean, especially Snoop and Pac came up together. You know, Thug Life and Dog Pound, we like came up together. You know, Thug Life, murder was the case, and I Get Around was the same time we would see each other in traffic. Yeah, you know what I mean? Keep it moving. That might have changed over time because that group of people hadn't been around Pac like we had. So they didn't know how Pac is as a celebrity, as a star. To actually deal with him requires more attention, more time, because he's Pac.
And here's the irony. Tupac left to go to Death Row Records because he wanted to record with Snoop and with Dre. But when he got there, by the time he was done, he didn't like either of them.
Tupac looked at me and said, "Man, is that how my shit gonna sound?" And I'm like, "Nah, man." Because he's ready to kick a hole in the wall. Told the guy, "Nah, man, they kicked us out of Can-Am. 6 o'clock this morning, this is the best that Kevin Lewis could do for us." He picks up the phone, he calls the office. He says Snoop was corny, take all day doing one song. He says, "I'm paying Nate Dogg child support, Rage. Y'all kick my engineers out the studio so that Rage can continue working on a record that she's been working on for 2 years. That's pretty fucked up. I am paying for this. Why are you guys kicking them out the studio when my record is the #1 record on Billboard?" Stuff like that, you know what I'm saying?
So, you know, that to me, you know, was childish on their part, but they can never feel the shoes that Pac felt. I walk into the light to evil.
But in the city of New York on September 4th of 1996, there was a big problem, and that had to do with a radio interview that Snoop Dogg did.
Because she asked me on the air, "How do you feel about Puffy and Biggie?" And I said what I felt. They're my homeboys, I love them.
Pac, of course, had big beef with New York.
Pac had a beef with New York because he got attacked in 1994 and there was a shot fired, and unfortunately it was self-inflicted.
Snoop was basically saying, "Hey, I don't have a beef with him." That set Tupac off, and we immediately spun the limo around and we went back to the hotel to confront Snoop. We couldn't find him, but we found Mr. Knight, and that's who Tupac confronted about what was going on the radio while we were in New York. I think Mr. Knight had me stay for the safety of Tupac, because I think Mr. Knight, with me not being there, he would have put his hands on him. He was that upset. And Pac's words were, I'm gonna cut out Machiavelli, and when I cut out Machiavelli, I'm the hell up out of here. You got your money, I don't want nothing else to do with Death Row, I'm out.
And after the major fallout between Suge and Tupac, suddenly Snoop walks back to the hotel.
When I got back to the hotel, it was a whole nother
atmosphere, like perpetuating it so it could be drama, which I still love MTV, but when it all go down, don't look at me and Biggie and be like, why is there a big East Coast, West Coast war?
So when we got on the plane to go back to LA the next day, Suge didn't let none of my security ride with me. I had to ride on the plane with him, his homies, and Pac. And it was the most uncomfortable ride I ever had in my life. Back, put the blanket on my head, knife in my hand, fork in my hand, and just sleep the rest of the ride. Because I feel like they finna try to do something to me. So I walk down the steps. We meet right here. I'm like, cuz, you going to Vegas?
Why was somebody that wasn't going to Vegas anyway asking Tupac, are you going to Vegas?
He do me like this. Went his way and he went my way.
Apparently the Long Beach Crips had put out a DVD with a bunch of diss songs and some music videos that dissed the Death Row Organization and dissed Suge Knight.
DVD was all about killing Death Row people. You feel me? Now the DVD was predominantly Long Beach people in it. You feel me? I'm from Long Beach. My whole time that I was on Death Row, I lived right here in Long Beach.
You always saw Pac and Suge hanging together. You always saw these niggas everywhere together. They was like big brother, little brother and shit. And the thing is, that relationship was dangerous for the powers that be.
I remember that. Not the West Coast. I got backlash from Suge Knight, Tupac, and Death Row. And then was our last days hanging out before he got killed. So we ended on a kind of foul note.
The tension between Death Row Records and the Long Beach Crips and the Snoop Dogg Dogg Pound camps was palpable, to the point where Snoop Dogg went to the point of making an entire music video that showed total disrespect for Suge Knight.
Bully got checked, you know what I'm saying? You know how when you in school and you got a bully, and he's scaring everybody and everybody going the other way. Scared putting their lunch money up, hiding their gold chains. Well, this day at school, the bully got checked. He had to put his gold chain in and try to light a cigar. You know, but the media didn't want to bring it off like that because they were scared that Suge was going to do something to him for telling the truth.
Shit go haywire.
Were you in Vegas?
No, we heard about it because they was trying to get us to go to Vegas. And we was like, Dogg Pound, we was really on our fuck Death Row shit, really. You know what I'm saying? We was already saying fuck Death Row.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? Because we know everybody.
And now we have opportunity. The people that need to be in Las Vegas are in Las Vegas, and the people who don't want to be seen in Las Vegas have cleared out.
Cause I am the LBC. I'm the king of Long Beach, nigga. I made it fashionable for niggas to bang the dub. I made it universal, motherfucker. I'm the nigga that took the set around the whole globe. Yeah, that's me.
Tupac hated people, and we were supposed to hate people because Tupac hated them.
In most law enforcement investigations, you find that the first suspects that are looked at are generally wives, girlfriends, significant others, people that would normally have a natural relationship, and you'd actually try to figure out if they were the most logical suspect. And in this case, it doesn't seem to happen, yet you're looking at, she had plenty of motive.
She was managing Snoop in the very beginning, but Snoop wasn't happy with that.
Nightlife Management, which Sharita Knight owned, which was Suge Knight's wife. By Suge owning Death Row Records, it would be a conflict of interest of him managing his artists too. So he had that in his wife's name. And not only did she manage every artist that was on Death Row, she also managed Caution. She managed us.
I think that he gave her the nightlife entertainment to give her some experience, get her experience, because she was young.
Anything goes down with Suge, you know who's going to run this company? Reggie. Nope, wrong. That's pressure Reggie can't handle. Let me tell you, if something goes wrong with Suge, who's going to run the company? Common sense, right? Sharita is on the thing. Sharita's on the paper. Yeah, Reggie would carry most of the burden. Man, they're tighter than you think. They're tighter than you think.
Even though she was young, you know, she had a baby, and so that kind of gave her the edge over a few people. I knew what he did when we were outside Death Row Records, but as soon as Sharita found out about it, something that had happened, he sent you home. You were done. He didn't play that one. It was like, I guess it was like, okay, either me or them, and I'm not giving up the child check.
She had a cheating husband. She had financial ties to him. She could definitely gain from him being dead. So in all of those circumstances, there might be good motive.
I mean, murder is pretty simple. The first person you go after is the spouse or the person closest to the victim.
It just changed his ego, his temper. The women started flocking the money, and that was basically the demise of our marriage. Suge got out of control.
She went with the flow. It didn't bother her. A lot of times, she got herself into situations, too.
Actually, by the time she said that, she was suing Snoop and trying to get money because she said her husband was going to kill him at any moment. She wanted to get her money while Snoop was still alive.
But more than just Suge, we wondered if maybe Tupac was a threat to Sharitha.
When Tupac came in, the picture of death row, it all just crumbled.
It would have been easy for her to take over, but I don't think that she had the experience that was necessary to keep a multi-million-dollar record company running like that.
You couldn't reach Sharitha except through intermediaries who were lawyers, but I had documents, and she knew I had those. I basically knew about her relationship with Kevin Gaines, so it was how far in Kevin Gaines was. Was he just involved with you, or was he really was he working for Suge too? And she basically claimed that he did work for Death Row Records, but it was at her behest and through her, and that the only time he was ever around Suge was the time she thought Suge was gonna kill him.
He worked briefly for Suge Knight, just as approximately 100 other officers. Officers were paid $75 an hour to work for Suge Knight. I was asked to work for Suge Knight, which I declined. But a lot of officers did, and they weren't all black officers, and they weren't all from LAPD.
They took a drive, and Gaines and she both got scared.
But according to the stories that roamed the halls of Death Row Records, Kevin Gaines was taken out to the middle of the desert as a warning. He was stripped naked and left to walk back to the city.
Because Suge was being very menacing, and she basically backed him off by saying, this man's a police officer, he's got a gun, you wouldn't dare kill a police officer.
According to FBI documents, Kevin Gaines was in Las Vegas from 2 days prior to the shooting of Shakur until 2 days after the death of Shakur. So we know that Kevin Gaines was already Snoop Dogg's bodyguard and apparently his muscle, and that Kevin Gaines had a relationship with Sharitha Knight. So what exactly was Kevin Gaines doing out on that special assignment in Las Vegas? We came across a letter that was we call it the confession letter, that was given to us by Chris Blatchford at Fox News. And this letter was given to him in 1998. By a gentleman who is now in prison. But at the time, he was a confidential informant for Fox News for Chris Blatchford, and it was reliable. It helped him, actually tipped him off to a couple of really big burglaries that had happened. CHP's offices got burglarized, and he helped Fox catch the people that did it. And this letter was alleged to have been written by Danny and Malcolm Patton. And the Patton brothers were Pyru.
Yes.
And
it's a gang in Los Angeles.
Yes, it's a gang in Los Angeles. I should say that.
Yeah.
That the Blood Gang.
Yeah.
And that they had mapped out this entire, not only confession that they were involved with the shootings, but why the shootings happened, what was all involved with it to begin with.
Yeah.
And in that letter, not only were the Pattons the ones who were alleged to have written the letter, but they named a rapper by the name of Little Half Dead. You have to be pretty hardcore, know the Dog Pound, to know who the players are, to know who he is. So his name came up, but it was immediately kind of the scoff because nobody ever heard this before. You don't need to look any further than the album cover that Little Half Dead did. In this album cover, he features a picture of a dead Tupac Shakur slumped over a console at Can-Am Studios, along with a picture of what arguably looks like Yafu Fula, the second victim right after the shooting, as a victim as well, being shot in the head. Little Half Dead himself is dressed up as no one other than the Terminator.
Dog Pound, we was really on our fuck Death Row shit, really. You know what I'm saying? We was already saying fuck Death Row.
And the story goes that they owed Freeway Rick Ross some money. At that time, Fox News was paying a lot of money, and if they thought you could break a story that would get the kind of OJ ratings that you solved Tupac and Biggie, that kind of ratings back in 97, 98, well, maybe it was worth giving this to. We've also heard that it was an insurance policy because people were dropping like flies during those days. Sometimes you can give the press a letter and you say, if anything happens to me,